In 1940, just prior to Pearl Harbor, a car drove into the driveway and 3-4 officers got out with a lot of gold on their shoulders and said that they would like to use, there's a field you got on your property that we've looked at that's real flat, and we need a field to practice our airplanes landing and takeoffs from Sandpoint in Seattle, which was a big air base. And we said, what do you mean? You're going to land airplanes on our cow pasture? They says, yes, that's what we're intending to do. Well, we said, how much are we going to get for this? And they says, nothing. We're just going to condemn it or take it. I said, well, what about the cows we got on the field? We have cows grazing there all the time in the summer. Well, there are certain days we won't be flying. We'll let you know. That caused a big problem. We'd have to get the cows off, put them back on, get them off. This went on for about 6 weeks, and finally they came back, the same group of officers, and said, we got a real problem. I said, yeah, we got a problem, all right. I said, what's your problem? Well, all these cow pies you got out in the field, the airplane wheels are hitting them, and it's just flattening the airplanes, the pilot, the students with cow manure. And then it dries on the plane, and the guys that have to wash the planes are all mad, and we can't have that anymore. Said, you're going to have to keep the cows entirely off the runway. So we fenced each side of the runway and just kept the cows off the runway, and they used that runway all until the end of the war.
The Skyport began as a flight training facility during World War II, and after the war was over, a fellow by the name of Ab Davies and his partner Al Lockwood took over the Skyport, and they began a flight training school to teach people how to fly. And a lot of their students were people who were just coming back from World War II and could go to school on the GI Bill. So apparently this was one of the forms of education that they could select to have the GI Bill pay for. At that time, the area was called the Seattle Sky Ranch, and Ab Davies and his wife Marjorie lived there. And Marjorie recollected once that they used to say if you could learn to fly at the Sky Ranch, you could fly anywhere because it was little more than a cow pasture. Davies and his partner were training about 125 young men a month on how to fly. And the Sky Ranch was the biggest flight training school in the state at that time. The Sky Ranch also served as a popular night spot. There was a bottle club there, which is a bring your own bottle bar. And there was dancing and music on the weekends. After the end of the GI Bill, the rent for the Sky Ranch began to rise, and Blackwood and Davies could no longer keep the business going. So they shut down, and Davies moved to Odessa, Washington, taking some of the planes with him, and started working doing crop dusting. In 1955, a man named Art Banco took over management of the field, and he kept it as a private use landing strip until 1961, and at that time, Lynn Emerick came onto the scene.
Lynn Emerick came, and we started the parachute and gliders, all that, and they were there for a number of years, and we worked out a program with him and had no problems at all.
When Lynn first started trying to form a club, and before we had access to what became the Skyport itself, we flew off of the Bellevue airfield, which a lot of people don't even remember existed. There was a large building up at Eastgate on the north side of the freeway there. I can't remember what the building was used for, but it's where the old Safeway, was. They would fly off of the Bellevue airfield. I think they probably hired, a plane at that point. I don't know that Lynn had one yet. And then they would just jump into the state park. So that went on for a short while before we were able to use the Skyport facility, on the Pickering. The older building on there was the Sky Ranch Tavern, and we converted that into a clubhouse where the parachutes were packed, and there were a couple of restrooms and concession area.
I'd say he come in 1962 or in the 60s sometime, just started out with one airplane, then he got 2, 3, 4, 5 in a big airplane. He held a world skydiving things that there one time. There was thousands of people down there. It was a big deal he had going there. A lot of parachuting. Parachuters landed all over this valley, in the trees, in the ditches. You can't believe it.
The road that we used to drive to the Skyport would kind of tee at the highway, and you could still cross the highway there. And then when the freeway came through, we lost one end of the airstrip. I think that's one reason why the freeway curves the way it does there through Issaquah, was to accommodate a certain length of the runway. We lost some, but it wasn't enough to really hamper the operation. Oh, it was a good relationship, very cooperative, and I remember getting together with them for other occasions from time to time.
One day I was out in the field spreading a load of manure. I was probably 200 to 300 yards from the airport going along, and I saw this airplane coming out of the hangar. And just kind of struck me odd because he wasn't just taxiing real slow, he was really gunning it. We had cows were all over the runway. It took off right down the middle of the airfield and killed 5 cows. Cut 2 of them in 2 with a propeller, hit one with a wing and broke its back. And the plane went up in the air about 200 feet and then come straight down and crashed in the field. And I'm thinking, what in the hell is this? And I jumped off the tractor and started to run over there. This guy climbed out and took off down I-90, and I'm chasing him. And if I'd have caught him, I'll tell you, I'd be in jail today. It had nothing to do with Lynn Emerick, because this guy stole the airplane. He was a friend of his, owned the plane, and he came out without his permission and stole it and took off right through the cows. Highway 10 going through, and then high taxes, because they said the land would be developed. Couldn't hold on to the farm, so we had to let it go.
The only conflict really was at the end when there was litigation involved with the developers, and Rob had, his side of it that, he had to support. Lynn felt that the contract that we had, the agreement with the new developers had been reneged, and so that's what kind of prompted various lawsuits that Lynn won, all of them up to the Supreme Court level, and then couldn't sue it after that, financially.
Between the rising value of property in Issaquah and the declining profits to be made from dairy farming, the Pickering sought to sell the land that the Skyport was on for development. The developers encouraged them to break Emerick's lease on the Skyport property so that they could start building the retail center sooner. And this led to a lawsuit. The property was tied up in litigation for several years while the developers and Emerick went back and forth against each other. And finally, in 1987, the lease expired. That put an end to the Skyport occupying that land. In that same year, there was also a bond issue aimed at keeping a Skyport in Issaquah. Many of the residents really liked the idea of having a Skyport, and the bond would have established a park, an air park. And unfortunately, the bond issue was defeated. Shortly after the election, a letter to the editor by Lee Will appeared in the Issaquah Press, and it read, "I'm sitting on the pea gravel at the Skyport right now. It is several days after the election. My heart is broken. Each time I drive up I-90, my eyes would behold magical moments as parachutes burst open and people skydanced and swirled to the ground. It was poetry in motion. Soon there will be bulldozers where I sit and write you this letter." Today, the Pickering Place Shopping Center stands at once was the Skyport.